The movement has gained massive influence through a well-conceived propaganda campaign. In 1987, two highly educated experts, Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen, produced an article that became a book. It was called After the Ball. It was originally published as an essay in a magazine called Guide, which was a gay rights magazine in 1987. Stated goal in their essay was to sketch out, quote, a blueprint for transforming the social values of straight America. The campaign we outline in this book, though complex, depends centrally upon a program of unabashed propaganda firmly grounded in long-established principles of psychology and advertising. Now, I'm going to walk you through the key strategy points that they outlined in that book. And as I do this, I want you to ask yourself a question. Does this read more like a book that was written 37 years ago, or does it read more like a history of the gay rights movement in America, written in retrospect? This was their language, their steps. First point in the strategy was to talk about gays and gayness as loudly and as often as possible. Quote, to desensitize the public is to help it view homosexuality with indifference instead of with keen emotion. Ideally, we would have straights register differences in sexual preference the way they register different tastes for ice cream or sports games. You can forget about trying to persuade the masses that homosexuality is a good thing, but if you only can get them to think it's just another thing with a shrug of their shoulders, then your battle for legal and social rights is virtually won. Number two, portray gays as victims, not as aggressive challengers. Gays must be cast as victims in need of protection so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. We must forego the temptation to strut our gay pride when it conflicts with the gay victim image. Again, remember, these are all their words. In practical terms, this means that the jaunty, mustachioed muscle men would keep very low profile in gay commercials and other public presentations, while sympathetic figures of nice young people, old people, and attractive women would be featured. Our community is weak and must manipulate the powers of the weak, including the play for sympathy. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be cast as victims in need of protection, so straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. Number three, give protectors a just cause. Our campaign should not demand direct support for homosexual practices, should instead take an anti-discrimination as its theme. The right to free speech, freedom of beliefs, freedom of association, due process, equal protection of laws, these should be the concerns brought to mind by our campaign. Number four, make gays look good. In order to make a gay victim sympathetic to straights, you have to portray him as an everyman. To offset the increasingly bad press that these times have brought to homosexual men and women, the campaign should paint gays as superior pillars of society. Yes, we know. This trick is so old it creaks. The honor roll of prominent gay or bisexual men and women is truly eye-popping. From Socrates to Shakespeare, from Alexander the Great to Alexander Hamilton, from Michelangelo to Walt Whitman, in no time, a skillful and clever media campaign should have the gay community looking like the veritable fairy godmother to Western civilization. Number five, make the victimizers look bad. At a later stage of the media campaign for gay rights, long after other gay ads have become commonplace, it will be time to get tough with remaining opponents. To be blunt, they must be vilified. The public should be shown images of ranting homophobes whose secondary traits and beliefs disgust middle America. The images must include Ku Klux Klan, bigoted Southern ministers, menacing punks, thugs, and convicts. We intend to make the anti-gays look so nasty that average Americans will want to disassociate themselves from such types. Does that sound like a historical description written from the present day of what happened? Or does it sound like a plan? This campaign's been highly successful in the way it's impacted our public perception of sexual orientation. And we're going to see something very similar happen with gender identity. You know, every movement of propaganda has to have a ministry. Again, I want to remind you the definition I gave you of the movement. It's a revolutionary campaign to redefine historic understandings of gender and sexuality, capture social systems, and silence opposing viewpoints. So I want to see some key social systems that are channels for propaganda in our day. The first one I would say that's been a powerful system is the medical system. In 2013, gender identity disorder was removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. In fall of 2011, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, or WPATH, released its new standards of care, which state explicitly that it's unethical and harmful to engage in any form of therapy that attempts to change one's gender. The APA in 2015 followed suit and released a large volume of new guidelines for gender affirmative care. Every major medical institution, rather than helping people find peace by realizing they're truly male or female, now encourage people to embrace a new gender identity, including social and medical measures. The strategy with the medical system has been this. Through a political process and pressure campaign, rather than actual research, you seek to change the definition. You promote the definition through the DSM. You affirm the model through major medical associations. You point to the new definition as settled fact, and you characterize any alternative approach as dangerous misinformation. Make sense? Education system. This is what I would call the power of certification. This is Adam Barr's actual kindergarten diploma. I was declared, thank you. On the 5th day of June in 1981, I was declared a master of kinder arts and skills. With all rights, privileges, and honors. We laugh, but in our country and our culture, there is a progression through a series of certification processes that allow us to actually engage the rest of society. Our educational system has the power of certification. Because basic education is required for participation in much of society, schools become centers with a captive population. Schools, therefore, are strategic targets for people who want to promote their agenda. Children and youth have always been the target of revolutionary movements. And remember, this is a revolutionary movement. It's not like the American Revolution. It's much more like the People's Revolution in China. It's a cultural revolution. Listen to this description of Mao's Cultural Revolution. Mao launched the so-called Cultural Revolution in August 1966. He shut down the nation's schools, calling for a massive youth mobilization to take current party leaders to task for their embrace of the bourgeois values and lack of revolutionary spirit. The population was urged to rid itself of what he called the four olds. Now listen to this, the four olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. Does that sound a little bit like the revolution we're living through here? There are incredible influencers that it would take multiple workshops just to introduce a lot of this to you at work in the world of education today. Introduced you last week to the Human Rights Campaign. If you go back and you look at week 1 handout, you'll see there's a PDF that I put in there that has a way of describing gender to children in schools. It was one of the options for our discussion. I had you do something else. If you just go back and look at that, that was prepared by the Human Rights Campaign, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit organization, gay straight alliances, state education boards, federal Department of Education. All of these have the power to do many things. They set standards. This is just a recent Oregon guidelines for kindergarten. You can see the outlined part right there. These are what they're saying that kindergartners should be able to do under the area of healthy relationships and violence prevention. One of them includes recognize that there are many ways to express gender. Kindergartners, Oregon. In other words, this is what an education standard is. Look at where these standards are being imposed. Not under sexuality and gender, under healthy relationships and violence prevention. So under the banner of anti-bullying policies, there's room for this propaganda to flow into the minds of kids. The next system is one that I think a lot of people have begun to see, is business systems. And that's that the business system wields the power of a paycheck. This campaign has pursued and pressed its way into the places of business. I'd like to invite Kurt to come forward real quick.
So what I do is I practice anesthesia for a living. In the state of Michigan, I have the same scope of practice as an anesthesiologist. So I'd come walking into the room. A lot of people think I'm an anesthesiologist, but I say I just play one on TV. Started out as I was a nurse for 8 years or so, went back to graduate school, got a degree in anesthesia, and now I've been practicing anesthesia.
So you had to get certified?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. But I was working in a, do you just want me to tell the whole story?
Yeah,
Sure.
just go ahead.
So I was working in a small community hospital in West Michigan. And when I say small, it's one of the smallest community hospitals in West Michigan. It wasn't the big place up on the hill where you expect these kind of things to happen. It was getting to the end of a day. So this is 2019. So this is pre-COVID. I don't know who mentioned COVID, but that was sort of a watershed moment for me, kind of waking up to this stuff. But it was 2019. It was the end of a day. And somebody said, well, I think I was the call guy for that night, so I was going to be the last guy out at the end of the day. They said, "Why don't you go get Brad out of the room? He's the last room running." So I said,
Brad's a surgeon?
No, he was another anesthesia provider. Okay. His turn to go home, so I had to go finish up the last room. So I think I was saying this to friends of ours last night. It's not like House where we get together and we discuss your case for 2 weeks and we figure out what's going on. I didn't know what case I was walking into. I didn't even know what OR it was. I just looked up at the board. I said, "Okay, Brad's in the room, whatever." Went to go get him out. He says, "Okay, I got this going. We're doing this case. It's this many years old. This is what I've done for him." I said, "Okay, have a good night. See you later. I'll fly the plane from here." So I look up. We're doing what's called an orchiectomy. Is anybody familiar with what that is? So it's a removal of the testicle. In this case, both of them. Oftentimes, this case is done unilaterally, so on one side, because of cancer. So it's not an unusual case to do at any hospital. You would do this because this person needs it done. In this particular case, it was an adult male, so it wasn't like we were doing it on a child, as if it makes it any better. But I started looking around, and we're doing an orchiectomy. The listed gender on the chart says female. As I'm looking closer, I'm looking down, I'm looking back, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, I think we're doing what I think we're doing here. And so you can kind of fill in the blanks. We're doing a gender reassignment on somebody. I didn't know, again, what I was walking into. Now, there's really no choice. There's nobody left. I'm the guy in house, so I'm going to finish this case. It's not like I can say, I'm walking out of this in protest. I can't abandon a patient. So we finish up the case. And again, this was 2019, so it was before I had kind of wrapped my mind around all these issues. I'll bet you in 2019, none of you thought about this stuff either. And so I didn't know what I wanted to say. I didn't know how I wanted to deal with this. It felt wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know what to say. So a couple weeks went by and I thought I need to say something to this surgeon. And I just politely said to him, "Look, I was in this case with you a couple weeks ago. I don't feel comfortable doing these cases anymore. Please don't ask me to be part of this." And that's kind of where we left it. He was very cordial about it. And we worked together on other cases. And I don't actually know of any other of those that he did. But these cases are going on all the time. In fact, recently at one of the Catholic hospitals in our area, there was a double mastectomy done on a young woman. Again, not a minor, but a double mastectomy done on a woman in a Catholic hospital. It wasn't booked as a gender reassignment surgery. It was just booked as a mastectomy, and that's a breast removal for any non-medical people out here. And it just happened, and nobody said anything. Again, it wasn't booked as a gender reassignment, even though that's what it was. And the Catholic hospital scolded the surgeon, but the surgeon still does surgery, even though these things are going on. So you might think this is something that's happening in Southern California, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., all these big population centers, but it's happening right around the corner. And so these are issues I'm glad we're talking about right now.
All right, thank you. What if you think about how concerned would you be that if you wanted to work in a major medical organization, that you might not be given the choice as to whether you're going to be involved in these sorts of things? How do you see that playing out over time?
Very concerned. It's just a matter of time before you're going to have to draw a line in the sand. I think in West Michigan, we're a few years behind some of the bigger population centers around the country, but make no mistake, it's coming. I don't think as far as medical professionals that we are in the minority. but we are the quieter voices. The tail's wagging the dog here. The loudest voices are dictating the policy. They're dictating what's going on in these facilities, and you have to keep your head down, otherwise it might get chopped off.
Let me just read you a quote real quickly. This is from Investopedia talking about this. It's under the category social responsibility. Social responsibility means that businesses, in addition to maximizing shareholder value, that in other words, metrics based around sales and profitability, shareholder value, must act in a manner benefiting society, not just the bottom line. Social responsibility has become increasingly important to investors and consumers who seek investments, not only that are profitable, but also contribute to the welfare of society and environment. While critics traditionally argued that the basic nature of business does not consider society as a stakeholder, younger generations are embracing social responsibility and driving change. LGBTQ plus supportive policies are considered an element of corporate social responsibility. As such, the arguments for a connection between CSR and company performance also apply to LGBTQ advocacy. Stakeholder theory, which is central to CSR literature, explains why social responsibility can pay off by improving a company's reputation, customer relationships, accumulation of human capital, and access to resources and financing. That's from an article called "Why Do Corporations Embrace LGBTQ plus Cause?" I wonder if they want to ask Bud Light about that one. I'm going to wrap up with this, is what I would call the media systems. If business systems have the power of paycheck, media systems have the power of celebrity. Social media has made it possible for everybody to have their own version of fame. All celebrity is managed by power brokers and popular opinion. So in other words, you can lose celebrity by losing popular opinion. If people think you're a jerk, you're no longer a celebrity to them. But there are also power brokers. All of these social media platforms, how many of you know they all have their own sets of rules? They have the power to allow certain information out and not allow other information out. I don't want to get into COVID, although it's come up a couple different times, but how many of you have heard the narrative recently like, oh, well, there were so many things we just didn't know at the beginning of COVID. There's so many facts we didn't know about masks or about vaccine safety or about who strategically should receive the vaccines or what are the comorbidity factors. We just didn't know these things. Anybody heard that narrative in the last year from people? Like, why can't we just, let it all go? No, we did know those things. We knew them from the very beginning. In fact, some of the world's top epidemiologists were actually speaking in a counter narrative. If you've ever heard of the Great Barrington Declaration, those were 3 of the world's top leading epidemiologists. And guess what happened to those folks? The power brokers shut them down, right? Now, again, I'm not taking a side on all this stuff, although I have a side, and if I teach another class, you'll hear it. But my point isn't the sides that we take, it's the power of the power brokers. If they can take world-class epidemiologists who work at the top institutions in the world globally and silence their voices, what do you think they can do to anybody who disagrees with the preferred narrative? Well, I can tell you what they did to little old me. So you might remember a segment of last week's talk when all I did was kind of define what is the movement and then break down that definition using quotes from their own literature. When I posted that on TikTok, short little 2-minute video, the views started bumping up, and then suddenly I got a notification. This post has been taken down for hateful conduct. They said, we do not allow any hateful behavior, hate speech, or promotion of hateful ideologies. I can tell you there was no fire in that video. It was very basic, using their own language, their own words, and it got taken down. Think about that kind of power that you can exert when literally within an hour of it going up, it was taken down. Now, I will say this, I appealed the decision. TikTok reversed their decision. But how many people who attempt to express their opinions will go through the step of saying, hey, wait a second. And it still demonstrates the power of the on-off switch that these people have. So what have we just done? We've looked at a clear communication strategy as outlined in that book in 1987 called After the Ball, the 5 steps. And then we've looked at how does that communication strategy actually get channeled through key social systems. We talked about the medical system, its power of facts. We talked about the schools and the power of certification. We talked about business systems, the power of the paycheck. And we talked about media systems, the power of celebrity. Now, we just scratched the surface of all that, but that at least gives you a sense of what is the waterfront that we're dealing with when it comes to this movement.